What's going on, guys? In this video, we're going to create a COVID tracker using Vue.js and Tailwind. So I know that building a COVID tracker, it might be a little controversial or maybe a little morbid even, but it's something that's very relevant, so I thought it would be a cool project to do. And basically, on the landing page here, we just have the global cases and deaths. So the new cases, you can see, so basically this is like up to this point today, the new cases, and then the total overall, same thing with the deaths, the new and total. So this is the global data. However, we can narrow it down by country. Like if I wanted to see, for instance, Albania, so that'll show us the total, the new. Now, it might say 0 for the smaller countries or countries that aren't doing that bad. However, if you go to a country where, there's a lot of cases, like my own, so if we go down to United States, you'll see it will show the new cases and the new deaths. All right, and if we're showing country data, we can click this to clear the country and just go back to the global data. This is also responsive. Okay, like I said, we are going to be using Tailwind. We're using Vue.js 3. Now, as far as the API we're using, it's covid19api.com, which is one of the best ones that I could find. And this was built by Kyle Redling, guys. I hope I pronounced that right. But this is a really in-depth API. There are some premium options for no rate limiting and access to extra endpoints. But let's take a look at the documentation real quick, and you can see over here all the different endpoints, all the different data you can get. We're basically dealing with the summary. So this is the endpoint we're going to use, which gives us some global data, and then it also gives us each individual country. But you could go much more in depth. You could bring in charts and maybe use something like D3 with graphs and all that, create a really nice dashboard. So this is more of a simple project, but I think it's a nice project to really get you more into Vue.js and also working with third-party APIs. I hope you enjoy it. Let's go ahead and get into it. All right, so we're going to get started on our project. We're going to be using the Vue CLI to get set up here. So this is the cli.vuejs.org website if you want to read more about it. I'm sure that a lot of you have already used this before, but basically you just need to install it globally. So you can install it with npm or yarn, and then you can just create a project with Vue create. So I'm going to open my terminal up. I already have it installed, so I'm going to run Vue create, and I'm going to call this Vue COVID tracker. And then it's going to ask us a few questions. If you're on Windows and you're using Git Bash, you might have issues with the arrows. So if so, just use PowerShell or something else. So as far as the version, I'm going to be using version 3, although I did build this in a way where version 2 should be fine to use. There might be some small changes, but you should be okay. But I'm going to choose manually select features and choose the first two options, keep them selected, choose view version and Babel. And then I'm also going to hit space and choose router, just because even though this is it's just a single page with a bunch of components, in case I wanted to add more routes later, I'm just going to include it when we start off. And then I'm going to uncheck linter. And we're going to choose version 3 and yes for history mode. And then I'm going to choose indedicated config files. And then no for a preset. So that'll go ahead and just get things set up for us. Okay, so now we're just going to CD into the folder that we just created, and I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code. Of course, you can use any text editor that you want. And then Visual Studio Code has an integrated terminal that I'm going to use instead of my general terminal. And then there's a couple things I want to install before we start our dev server. So I want to install Tailwind, and there's a few ways to do that, but with the CLI you can actually add it as a plugin, and it will just set it all up for you. So we can do that with Vue add Tailwind. And it's going to create some config files. I'm going to choose minimal for the Tailwind config JavaScript file. And it'll also create this post CSS config file as well. And if we look in source assets, we have our Tailwind CSS, which is bringing in the base components and utilities. So it should be all set to use. We should be able to use Tailwind classes now. And then the only other thing I want to install is Moment, which is a date formatter. So we're going to just install that as well. Once we do that, we can do npm run serve. And that's going to start our development server on port 8080. So if we go over to, let's say HTTP, let's do localhost 8080. And it's going to look a little weird just because Tailwind is already implemented, so it has some conflicting styles. But we're going to get rid of all the base styles right now. So if we go to source and let's go to our app.view. So this is our main app file or our main app component. And this loads the router view. So basically any pages or views that we're on. By default, we have the home.view page or view component, which we're seeing now. There's also an about, but we don't need the about. But whatever we're seeing is going to output here. We also have this nav right here, that home and about nav. We don't need that, so I'm going to just get rid of that. And then we don't need any styling as well, so we'll get rid of all that default styling. Okay, and now this is loading the views home.view file. So in here, they're bringing in a Hello World component from the components folder, which we don't need. So I'm going to get rid of this import, and we can get rid of this. We don't need to declare it. And then up here in the div, let's get rid of these two lines, and for now we'll just say Hello World. Okay, so we've kind of cleared everything out. As far as the about page, we don't need this, or the about view. So we can delete that. It will give us an error because the router is looking for it. So right here in router index.js, this is where you would define any routes. We don't need the second one here, which is the about, so we'll just get rid of that. All right, so now we have kind of a clean slate. Now the first thing I want to do is create the header component. So this hello world right here, I'm just going to rename this to header.view, and we'll get rid of everything that's in this template. So clear out the template tags. And then let's change the name from hello world to header. And we don't need any props here, so we can get rid of this stuff here. And we don't need any styling since we're using Tailwind, so we'll get rid of all that. And in the template here, we'll have a header tag, and then let's do a div, and we'll say COVID-19 tracker. And then just to bring this into our app, let's go to app.view. And since we're bringing in a component here, we don't want to bring it into the home page, because if we do that and then we add other pages or views and add new routes, we'd have to bring it into all of them. So I'm going to just bring it into the main app.view. So we do need to add script tags here, and we want to import header, and we can import that from, and we should be able to do @/components/header. Okay, and then we do have to declare it. So let's say export default object and then components, and we just want to define in here header so that we can use it up here in our template. So up here, let's just put in our header tag, our header component, and we should see that displayed. Now the router view, so everything under the header, I want to wrap that in a div, and I want that div to have a class of container. Okay, so we'll just move this up here. Now container, Tailwind is very, I spelled that wrong, didn't I? Tailwind is very low level, so the classes, like there's not a lot of predefined styling to classes. They're basically made to do one thing. So adding container doesn't automatically give it, margin auto and push it to the middle. So we could add, MX auto, which is margin auto on the x-axis, that pushes it over. And then we could add some padding. But I want to show you can also add default config values. So if we go to Tailwind config and we go to theme, we could say for the container, we want to have some defaults such as the center, we want to set that to true. So if I save that, it takes a minute because this has to reload down here, and then you'll see that gets pushed to the center. And if we want some padding, of course we could add another class onto that div, but we can also add it here. So I could say padding, and we'll set that to 2 rem, which should get pushed over. Okay, so there we go. So now we have some padding by default on the container class. All right, so I just wanted to show you that, and we want to push that to the middle. Now let's style the header. So we're going to go back to header and just add our classes. So for our classes, I want to, first of all, let's make this smaller so we can see. Let's move the text to the center. So we have a class called text center. I do want to have a blue background, so we'll do BG blue, and then we can do a number here. The higher the number, I'm going to do 800. The higher, the darker. So we'll do 800. The text is black though, so we want to change that. So we'll do text-white. And then let's add some padding. So we'll do P-4, which will give it padding all around. And then also let's do MB, so margin bottom. Let's do MB 10, which will push anything under it down. Now the text, we also want to deal with that. So let's give this div a class, and I'm going to do text-3XL. Now on bigger screens, so anything medium and above, I want the text to be a little bigger, so we can do MD colon, and then let's say text 5XL. And what that means is when we hit a certain breakpoint, the medium breakpoint, you can see that that will then get a little bigger. All right, I also want to make it bold. Let's say font-bold. Let's actually close this. Font bold, and then let's do MB3. So I just want to add a little bit of spacing under this text here because I'm just going to put the link to the API and the author right underneath. So underneath the div, we'll have a paragraph. You don't have to do this. I'm just doing it to give credit to the API author. So we'll say API by, and let's have an A tag. I want this link to be light blue, so I'm going to give it a class of, let's say, text blue 300. And then HTTPS, and it's going to be COVID API or COVID-19 API.com, and I'm just going to put the link in here as well. And let's just have this open in another tab. So we'll set target to _blank. All right, so we just have a link to the API website. So that should be it for our header, very simple. Actually, no, one more thing, I want to add an icon to it, a little virus icon just to add to the look. So let's go back to header, and I'm just going to use the Font Awesome CDN for this, which I have, let's see, where are we? Where are my bookmarks? So I'm going to go to cdnjs.org and just search for font. So Font Awesome, I'm going to grab the link tag, and I'm going to put that in my public index HTML. Put it right above the title. Okay, then we'll close that up, and then in the header, I'm just going to add right in front of the text here, I'm just going to put an I tag with a class of FA, and then FA-viruses. And then that should give us a little icon there, little logo. All right, so that's it for the header. Let's see, the app view, we can close that up. So let's work in the home now because we want to start to think about fetching our data. So I'm going to close that up, and the way we're going to do this is we're going to use a lifecycle method called created. So basically there's a lifecycle with certain functions that you can hook into to do certain things, and we want to get this data from the API when the page loads. So we're going to go down here and say created, and this will run right away. So if I do a console log here and I come over and open the console, you're going to see the 1, 2, 3. Okay, so this gets called right away. That's where we want to make our initial request. So the request though, I'm gonna run here, or I'm sorry, the function to make the request I'm going to run here, but I'm going to put it in a dedicated method. So we can just say methods up here, which is an object. Make sure you put a comma after this. And then let's create a function here. We're going to call it fetch, we'll say fetch COVID data. Now I do want to make this asynchronous, so I'm just going to say async. And then we want to make our request, put that into a response variable. So let's say await and then fetch. You can use Axios if you'd like. Now as far as where we're getting this data from, if we go to the API website, which I'll have a link to in the description, and we go to the documentation, there's a whole bunch of endpoints to hit to get all different types of data. So, I mean, you could make something really in depth. What we're doing is pretty simple. So we're using the summary endpoint. And what this gives us, if we say view more, it gives us an object with the global stats So confirmed cases, or new confirmed, total confirmed, new deaths, total deaths, new recovered, total recovered. So it gives us, that's global for the entire world. And then it also has a countries array with that data for each country. And then at the very bottom, there's also the date and time, basically the timestamp of this data. So we want to get those three things. So let's go ahead and actually let's grab the endpoint. So summary, and then I'm going to grab this right here. And then we'll go ahead and put that right in here. So that's what we're going to make our request to. And then let's get the JSON. So we want to say const, we'll say data equals await res.json. And then I'm just going to return from here the data. Okay, so that's our fetch COVID data function. Now we're going to call this down here in created so that it runs right away. So to do that, and we want the response to be in a variable, we'll call that data. So we'll say this dot fetch COVID data, and that's going to be a promise. So we want to make sure we do a sync here, and we want await here, and then let's just do a console log of data. Okay, and we'll close this up, and let's open up our console, and we should see our data. So we have global, actually we should have countries too. Okay, so now, yeah, global, countries, date, ID. All right, so these values that we're getting here, I want to put these into the state of our component or our view. So let's go up here and let's add data. So data is going to be a function. Make sure you have a comma at the end here. And then this is going to return an object with our values. So the first thing I want to have is a loading state, which I'm going to set to true by default. And then once we make our request, we'll set that back to, or we'll set that to false, so that we don't try to render the UI before we actually fetch our data. I'm going to have a title as well, which the default will be global. But if we choose to look at the data by country, then title will be the name of the country. But we'll get to that later. Let's just set it to global for now. And then the data date, so that's going to be an empty string to begin with, but we'll fill it once we get our data from the API. Same with the stats. That'll be the object with like the cases and all that. And then countries is going to be an array. I want to fill that with the countries. And then we're also going to have a loading image, which I'm going to put here, and I'm going to require it. So this is going to be in, I'm going to put it in the source assets folder. It's just an hourglass GIF. So I want to basically show this when we're actually fetching the data. And you can get this from the repository in the description. But this is going to be require, and then we want to go into assets / and then hourglass.gif. All right, and that should be good. Now down here, oops, I forgot an S. So down here, once we get the data, we want to assign it to some of these variables up here. So we do that by using this dot and then whatever we want to assign. Let's say data date. I'm going to assign that to the data that comes back from the API, which has that date value, which is this right here. And these are all uppercase. That's just how the API works. So then let's also set the stats. So the stats I'm going to set to the data that comes in, and then global, which is this right here. So this is going to get put into this dot stats. And then let's do the countries. So this dot countries, I'm going to set that to the data that comes in, and then countries. And then finally, I'm going to set this dot loading, which is true by default. We want to set that to false. And then let's go up top here to our template, and I'm going to change this div to a main. And I don't need a class on this main, but I want to do conditional rendering here. So we're going to add a vif directive. So say vif, and we want to set that to not loading. So if it's not loading, that means we're ready to render our data. So for now, I'll just say show data. And then let's put another main tag under this. And here we want to put a v-else. So basically, if it is loading, then whatever we put in here is going to show. All right, and I'm actually going to put, let's put some classes on this just to style this a little bit. So for classes, let's do flex. We'll make this a flex column, and let's align center and justify center and text center. And then inside this main here, we're going to have a div, and I'm going to give this a class or a couple classes. Let's do text dash gray 500. So this is just going to say fetching data, and then we'll do a 3XL for the size. Let's do margin top 10 and margin bottom 6. And then inside this div, we'll just say fetching data. And then right under it, I'm going to have my image. So here, the source, since we're binding to this, we're going to put a colon in front of this because we're binding that loading image that we have in our data. So loading image, and then let's just add a couple classes to this. So I'm going to do a width dash 24, and let's do M auto, so margin auto to center it. All right, so we might not see that. Yep, so you saw it for a second. So whenever the loading state is true, it's just going to flash there. And if you want, you could just test, and you could set this loading to true down here, and it'll just show it. Okay, so it should look like that. All right, so now that we're able to fetch the data, let's start to create our components where we want to display it. So in components, I'm going to create a new file, and let's call this data title.view. So what this is going to have is the date, so whatever the current date and time of the data, also whatever the title is, which will be global by default, but then later on we'll have a country select, and then it will show the name of the country. So let's create this. We're going to have a template, and in our template, let's have a div. We'll give this a class of, let's say, text dash center. And I know there's a lot of classes we're typing out and stuff, but I want this to look nice. I didn't just want to show, an ugly page. So, and it should also give you some knowledge on some Tailwind classes. So H2, let's do class, and we'll make this text. We'll do 3XL, and let's also make this bold, so font bold. And in the H2 here, we're actually going to have a prop that's passed in for text. Okay, we want our double curly braces here, and then show whatever text is. That's going to get passed in. And then we're also going to have the date. So let's do another div here. Can I use Emmet in here? Let's do a class of text, and let's say text 2XL. And then we'll do a class of MT4, so margin top 4, and then margin bottom 10. And our date's going to go in here. Now we're going to format the date, but just for now, I'll put it right in there. It's going to be called data date. Okay, and then let's go down here, and let's have our script tags. And we want to export default. The name of this component is data title, and it's going to take in some props. So the props are going to be text and date data. Oh, I'm sorry, data date. Okay, so those are our props. We are going to use moment here, and we're going to use a computed function, but we'll just keep this for now. And then let's go to our home, and let's import that component. So we're going to go right above our export, and let's import data title from, and we should be able to just do /components/data title, and then we need to register it here in components, so data title, and then let's go up top. So right here, let's get rid of this show data, and let's put our data title in. Actually, we want to do that. So data title, which takes in text. So we're going to bind our text prop, and we're going to set that to whatever the title is, which by default, if we look down here, is global. And then we also want the date. So that's going to be data date, and set that to data date. Okay, so there we go. Now this doesn't look very good, the date and time, so we're going to use Moment to format that. So we already installed Moment at the beginning of the tutorial. If you didn't, just go ahead and npm install Moment. And let's go right above this export, and let's import Moment from Moment. Now what we're going to do is add a computed down here. So we want to say computed because we want this to just happen automatically. So we're going to have a field called timestamp, and we're going to set this to a function, and we want to return from here basically our formatted date. So let's say moment. We're going to pass in our data date prop, and then we're just going to format it. So dot format. And then how we want to format this, so we'll do month, say, and then DO, and then our year, and then for the time, let's see, after that, let's close the sidebar up. So after this, we'll do a comma, and then the hour, minutes, seconds, A. And then instead of up here, instead of just putting the data date directly, we're going to put the computed timestamp. Let's see, I must have messed something up here. Reference error, data date is not defined. Oh, I'm sorry. Since we're using this down here, we have to use this. There we go. Okay, so there we go. Global, April 1st, 2021, 118. All right, so that looks good. That's our data title component. The next thing we're going to want is our data boxes, which are going to show the cases and deaths. So let's create that. We can close up data title. Let's go under components, and let's create a file called databoxes.view. All right, and in here we're going to have our template. And let's close that up. And let's, before we do our template, let's create our script. And we want to export default and have the name here, which is data boxes. And now this is going to take in the stats, so we need to have our props, and that's going to take in a stats prop to display. And then for now, let's just say data boxes. I just want this to show on the screen, so I'm going to save that, and in our home, let's bring that in. So data boxes. And we want to add that here as well. And then, let's see, we'll show this right under the data title. So data boxes, and we want to pass in as a prop here. So we want to vbind stats and set that to stats, which are going to be the global stats to begin with. All right, so the component is showing. Right now we just have data boxes, just the text. So we have quite a bit of styling to do here. We want two nice boxes and a grid, so let's add a div. Actually, I'll use Emmet here. So let's have a div with the class of grid, and I'm going to do a class of, actually I can't do like this, can I? Because on medium screens I want to do grid calls to it. Oh, I can do that. All right. So on medium screens, we'll have two columns. It'll be stacked on small screens. And then let's add a gap. So we'll do gap 4. And then in here, let's do, basically we're going to have two boxes. So this is the first box is going to have, let's do shadow dash MD, so it'll have a shadow around it. Let's do BG dash blue. We'll do blue 100, so it'll be a very light shade. And then let's do paragraph 10, padding 10, and text center, and let's make it rounded. Okay, so that's basically the outline of our box. And then in here we'll have an H3, and let's give this, let's do text, we'll say text 3XL for this, and let's make it text dash blue dash 900, so it'll be just a dark blue, and then font bold, and let's do margin bottom 4, and inside this H3 we're going to say cases. All right, and we can save this just to check it out. And then under that H3 we're going to have another div, and let's give this a class of text-2XL, and let's also do an MB-4, and inside here is where we're going to have the total. So we'll have the new cases and the total cases, and I'm just going to have a span here with a class of font bold, and in here we'll say new colon. And then under that we want the confirmed cases, or I should say the new confirmed. Remember that, do we have the data still shown down here? No, we don't. But basically on that stats prop that's passed in, we have new confirmed and total confirmed. So let's put our stats, and we're going to do new, I think it's uppercase, new confirmed. Let's just see if that works. Yep, there we go, new confirmed. And then we also want the total, so I'm going to just grab both of these, and then let's change this to total, and this is going to be total confirmed. Actually, no, I did that wrong. We want the div to, this div to surround both of them, so I'm going to just undo that, and I'm going to copy the whole div, and then change this and this to total. There we go. All right, and then we want the depths, so I'm gonna just copy the box, which is this shadow right here. Actually, I can put a, we'll say box 1. So this div ends right here, so I'll just grab this whole thing and paste that in. So this will be box 2, and this is gonna be depths, and let's change this. So it's this is, instead of confirmed, both of these, so new depths, total depths. Let's save that. And I'm just going to make the second box a little darker. So the second box I'll do a 200 like that. And these should be side by side on larger screens. Now you'll notice that these numbers don't have commas. So what we could do is create a method to actually add the commas. So under here, let's do methods, and that's an object, and then we want a function or a method called, let's call it number with commas. So this is going to be a function that takes in a number, and I'm actually going to use regular expression here. This I just got this off Stack Overflow, so I'm going to paste this in. You guys can just copy it from the repository, or you can type this madness out. And then all we have to do is wrap these in that method. So up here, let's do number with commas and just wrap this new confirmed. If I save that, you'll see that the comma gets added. So I'm just going to do that to all of these. So this one here, make sure you put on the ending parentheses as well. So here and here, ending parentheses. Okay, so that'll give it all these numbers, their commas. So those are the data boxes. Now, the way we have it is good if you just want global data, but we also want to be able to narrow it down by country. So in components, let's create a new file here called country select.view. And for country select, let's see, let's do our template, and let's do our script, and export default name is going to be country select, and then as far as props, it's just going to take in the countries. Yeah, so take in the countries, and just for now, just say select, because I just want to show it on the screen. So we'll go back to home, and let's bring that in, just like our other components. So this is going to be country select, country select, and then let's register it here. Okay, and then we're going to put this, let's see, so we have our data boxes. I think we should put it below, just so when we look at the countries, it doesn't cover the boxes. So say country select. As far as what we want to pass in here, remember we want to pass in the countries, so let's vbind countries to the countries in our state. Okay, so now it shows the select down here. So let's go back to country select, and let's start to add what we need here. So we're going to have a select field. Name ID, we don't need that. Now, since this is an input field, we want to bind this to data in this component, so we do that with vModel. So we're going to say vModel, and we're going to call this selected. So then down here, we just add our data function that will return an object, and we have our selected value is going to be 0 by default. All right, now let's see. So we have that. This is going to have a change event, but we're going to do that after. I first just want to be able to show all the countries, because remember those are getting passed in as props. So we should be able to put an option here. Let's see. So we'll do option. Actually, let's do the default option first. It's just going to have a value. Let's say value 0, and it's just going to say select. We'll say select country. So if we save that, we should see down here just to select with select country. But let's style this a little bit. So the select tag right here will add some classes. There is a select, oh no, it's form select class that we can use. Let's do margin top 1. This is going to be block level. Width, we want it to be full. We want it to have a border. Let's add some padding, and let's make it rounded. And then let's do margin top. Let's do margin top 10, not 1. Okay, so now that looks much better. So now as far as getting the countries in here, we're going to have our option, and we need to use a v-for directive here because we need to loop through the countries and basically output an option for each one. So in here, let's do v-for equals, and what we want to set here is say country. So you could call this whatever you want. Since it's a country, that's what I'm calling it. And then in, and then whatever the data, the array we're using, which is called countries. And then for value, we want to bind to that. So we want to put a colon in front of it. And we'll use the country. Let's do country.id. And the way the API works, it's going to be uppercase ID. Okay, remember this country is actually an object that has an ID. It has the new confirmed, the total confirmed, and all that data. But for the value of this particular of this select list, we want the ID. And then what we want to display is going to be the country name, which is going to be country with uppercase C. All right, and let's see, elements and iteration, expect to have vbind key. So you can put vbind in front of this, but you don't need to. This is just a ESLint thing. So if we save that, now you can see we have a list of all of our countries. Now it doesn't do anything. If I select a country, nothing happens. So what we're going to work on now is our change event. So right here in the select, let's put, let's say @change. Okay, so when this changes, we're going to call a method called onChange, like that. And then we're going to create that method down here. So let's go under data and say methods, and let's say onChange. So onChange, we're going to need to basically emit an event upwards into our main, home.view file, because we want to change, basically we want to change the stats from being, because it's global to begin with, but we want to change the stats to then be that particular country stats. So to emit an event, we can simply do this dot and then money sign emit, and then we can give this a custom name. We'll call it get country. Now we need to send the country data with it. Okay, so whatever country is selected. So what we can do is go right above this, and let's create a variable here called country, and we'll set this to this dot countries, which is all of them, and then let's do a dot find, and this will take in a function, and we'll just call it item. So for each country is an item. Then we want to find where the item.id is equal to whatever this dot selected is. Okay, in fact, let's do a console log here of country and see what that gives us. So I'm going to open up my console and I'm going to just select a country, and you can see it actually gives me a proxy. This is how View 3 works, but we can see the data right here in the target. So we get like the name, the code, the cases, or new cases, new confirmed, all that stuff. And then what we want to do is emit that upwards. So we're just going to pass that in here like this. All right, so we'll get rid of that. And now, since we have this emit get country, we can now go to the country select, and we should be able to say at get dash country, and then set that to something, set that to a function that we want to run, when this is emitted. So we'll call this get country. We'll call it get country data. Okay, so then that will fire off, and we can add that as an event down here. As a method down here. So right under fetch COVID data, make sure there's a comma there. Then we're going to do get country data, and this will actually take in country, because down here when we did the onChange and we emit get country, we passed it in here. Okay, and then up above we did that at get country, and then we call this so we can pass this in, and all we want to do now is set the stats. So originally it's set to global, right? So now we're going to set it to country. And then I also want to set the title, which is originally set to a string of global. We'll set it to the country, which is the name. All right, so now let's save that. And now if I were to select, like, let's say Albania, you'll see it'll change the title and it'll show me the cases and the deaths for Albania. Now, in most of the smaller countries, or the countries that are doing fairly well, are going to be 0 for most of the day, I guess until they get reported. I think that's how it works. Because if you go to United States, where we have a ton of cases and deaths, it's getting a little better. But if we go to United States, you'll see this will actually show the new cases for today and the new deaths for today. All right, so the last thing that I want to do is be able to basically clear this and go back to global. We can keep changing countries here, but I want a button to clear it so it goes back to showing the global cases. So what we'll do is we'll add a button at the bottom. So let's go under country select, and let's put a button here. And I'm going to give this a bunch of classes. We'll do BG dash. Let's do BG green 700, text white, we'll make it rounded. We'll do padding 3, let's do margin top 10, and when it's in its focus state, I don't want any outlines, so I'm going to set focus : outline none. And on hover, let's say hover : I'm going to say BG green, and we'll change it from 700 to 600 on hover. Okay, so we'll have a button, and this will just say clear country. All right, now this button, I only want to show if a country's showing. I don't want it to show to begin with if it's global. So what we can do is add on to this, and let's put a vif. Oops. So vif, and we'll just say in here if stats dot country. So if I save that, we can see it. If I reload and it's global, it doesn't show. So it's only going to show if I show a country. Now, as far as what we want this to do, we want to add a click event. So we'll say @click, and then we're going to call clear. We'll just call it, I guess, clear country data. And then let's add that as a method. So we're going to go down here. Let's go right under get country data and say clear country data. Now we're going to be making another request, so we're going to make this async, because all we're going to do is refetch the global data and set that, set the stats back, set the title back. So here we can just do, let's first of all do a this.loading and set that to true, because we're going to make a request. I should probably spell this right. So set that to true, and then we can just call this dot fetch COVID data, but let's put this in a variable called data and set it to await that, because that gives us a promise. Then we can set this dot title. I'm just going to set it back to the string of global, because that's what we're going to be seeing is the global data. And then this dot stats, instead of being the individual country, we're going to set it to data dot global, just like in the beginning. And then let's set the loading, set that to false, because it's done loading. All right, so now if we choose a country, it'll show us that data. If I choose clear country, it refetches and just sets everything back to global. Okay, and if we make this a little bigger, it's going to look like this. Okay, so you can just check the stats for any country that you'd like, and we can clear it and it'll go back to global. And that's it. Now this is obviously something that's pretty simple. It's something we put together in 40 minutes or so. But this API gives you a lot of data. You have a lot of different options to display. You could implement graphs, maybe use something like D3. You could create a pretty extensive dashboard, and I would highly recommend that you build onto this project. Maybe even have some other routes where you can see like how many cases each day or something like that. If you do something like that, please tag me on Twitter. Same thing with any project. If you guys ever watch any of my tutorials or courses and you add on to it, you change it, you make it better, I love seeing that stuff. So just post it on Twitter and tag me, and I'd love to see it. But that's it, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this little project, and I will see you next time.